Rain fell over the village of Hollow Creek, tapping softly on the roof of the small healer's cottage at the edge of the woods. Inside, Elara Voss knelt beside a low fire, grinding herbs into paste with steady hands, while her son slept in the next room. She had lived in this village for 3 years now, known to everyone simply as Elara the Healer, a quiet woman with a quicker mind than most, and a past she never spoke of. Nobody in Hollow Creek knew her real story. They did not know that she had once lived behind the high stone walls of the Moonvale stronghold, or that she had once loved, and feared, a man whose name could silence a room. They did not know that her son, Ren, sweet and clever and full of questions, was the son of the Alpha King. 3 years ago, when Elara had learned she was carrying his child, fear had swallowed every other feeling. She had seen what happened to the children of powerful men in that world. They were not raised. They were used. Claimed as heirs to be trained for war, or discarded as threats to be quietly erased if they were inconvenient to someone else's ambitions. She could not tell which fate would befall her child, and she had not been willing to risk either. So she had run, in the dead of night, with nothing but a small bag and a heart full of terror, and she had not looked back. Now Ren was 5 years old, with golden eyes so like his father's that Elara sometimes had to look away when the evening light caught them just right. He did not know who he was. He only knew that his mother loved him fiercely, and that some nights she held him a little too tightly, as though afraid the wind might carry him away. It was on a stormy evening, much like this one, that everything began to unravel. A group of wounded warriors stumbled into Hollow Creek just after sunset, having been caught in a border skirmish some miles east. The village had no proper healer's hall, only Elara's small cottage, and so the wounded were brought to her one by one, bleeding and exhausted, needing stitches and salves, and calm hands to steady them. Among them was a man who gave his name simply as Kellen. He wore plain leather armor, unmarked by any crest, and carried himself with the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed, without needing to raise his voice. His shoulder had been torn open by a blade, and though he said little, Elara could see the pain etched into the set of his jaw as she worked. She did not recognize him at first. It had been 3 years, after all, and grief and healing work had worn new lines into her own face. But something about his voice, low and even, sent an uneasy shiver down her spine as she cleaned his wound. "You have steady hands," he said, watching her work. "Years of practice," she answered, keeping her eyes on the task. "Have we met before?" Her hands did not shake, though her heart pounded hard enough that she feared he might hear it. "I don't believe so," she said. "I would remember a face like yours." It was a careful lie, the kind she had grown skilled at telling, but as she looked up briefly to check his color, their eyes met, and for one terrible moment, she thought she saw recognition flicker behind his gaze. Then it passed, and he only nodded, wincing as she tightened the bandage. He did not recognize her yet, but something in him had noticed her all the same, some quiet pull he could not explain, and he found himself unwilling to leave the village as quickly as his men expected. He told the others his wound needed a few days to heal properly before travel. It was not entirely a lie, but the truth was that something about the healer and her cottage kept drawing him back, again and again, though he could not have said why. It was on the second evening that he met Ren. The boy had wandered into the front room, while Elara was fetching more bandages, curious, as children often are about strangers. He stood in the doorway, studying Kellen with an open, unafraid gaze that few adults dared to hold. "Are you a warrior?" Ren asked. Kellen, propped up against the pillows, allowed a small smile. "Something like that." "Did it hurt? Your arm?" "A great deal." Ren nodded solemnly, as though this confirmed something important, and then climbed onto the stool beside the bed without waiting for permission. "My mother says brave people are the ones who feel scared and do the hard thing anyway, not the ones who don't feel anything." Kellen looked at the boy for a long moment, something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. "Your mother sounds wise." "She is," Ren said proudly. "She knows everything." From the doorway, Elara froze, her arms full of clean linen, watching the exchange with a rising sense of dread she could not quite name. She told herself it was nothing. Just a boy curious about a stranger, and a wounded man glad for company. But something about the way Kellen studied her son, quiet and searching, made her skin prickle with old fear. "Wren," she said, keeping her voice light, "let our guest rest. Come help me in the garden." Wren sighed the dramatic sigh of a child asked to leave somewhere interesting, but he obeyed, hopping down from the stool and following her out. Kellen watched them go, an odd unease settling over him that he could not explain, like a word sitting just at the edge of memory, refusing to be caught. Over the following days, despite Alara's quiet efforts to keep them apart, Wren kept finding his way back to Kellen's bedside. He brought him small gifts, a smooth stone from the creek, a drawing of a wolf he had made with charcoal, and sat beside him, telling stories with the easy confidence of a child who had never learned to be careful with strangers. Kellen, who had spent years surrounded by soldiers and advisors, and rarely anyone who spoke to him without calculation, found himself strangely comforted by the boy's company. There was something familiar in it, something that felt less like meeting a stranger and more like remembering. Ilara noticed the change in Kellen too, though she could not name it. She noticed the way his eyes softened when Wren spoke, the way he seemed to be studying the boy's face as though searching for something. Old instincts screamed at her to send Wren away, to invent an errand, a visit to a neighbor, anything to keep distance between her son and this stranger who unsettled her so deeply. But Wren, sensing her worry, only grew more curious, more determined, to spend time with the wounded man who listened to him so patiently. On the fourth night, a storm rolled heavily over Hollow Creek, thunder rattling the shutters, and rain hammering the roof. Ilara had finally gotten Wren to bed, exhausted from a long day, and had settled into the front room to mend torn shirts by candlelight, her mind restless with unease she could not shake. She must have dozed off in her chair, because she woke with a start sometime past midnight to find Wren's bed empty. Her heart lurched. She hurried through the cottage, candle in hand, and found the door to the small guest room where Kellen lay resting, standing slightly ajar. She crept closer, ready to scold her son for wandering, and stopped short at what she saw. Wren stood beside the bed, small and barefoot in the dim light, believing Kellen to be asleep. He leaned close, the way Ilara herself used to lean over his cradle in the earliest, most frightened days of his life, and began to hum the lullaby she had sung to him every night since he was born. It was an old melody, one passed down through generations of her mate's bloodline, one she had learned from Kellen himself in the brief, golden months before everything fell apart. It was a lullaby meant only for children born of the old alpha lines, ending in a hushed, secret name, a true name given only once, spoken so quietly that no enemy could ever twist it into a curse or a claim. Wren, of course, did not know what the name meant. He only knew it as the last soft words of the song that made him feel safe. But Kellen was not asleep. He lay perfectly still, eyes closed, and heard the boy whisper the name clearly into the quiet room. His entire body went rigid with shock, because that name was not simply a lullaby. It was a naming rite, ancient and sacred, spoken only over children of his own line, taught to no outsider, sung by no one but the mothers of alpha heirs. He had heard it only once before, murmured over his own cradle by his late mother, and he had sung it only once himself, to a woman he loved, teaching her the words in case she ever carried his child and needed them. The pieces slammed together in his mind all at once. The healer's steady hands, the golden eyes he had told himself were merely a common trait, the pull he could not explain from the very first night. He opened his eyes slowly and looked at the boy standing beside him in the dark, and for the first time, truly looked. "Wren," he said quietly. The boy startled, embarrassed to be caught out of bed. "I couldn't sleep. I wanted to make sure you weren't scared of the storm." Kellen's throat tightened with an emotion he had no name for. "That's a very kind thing to do." He studied the boy's face in the low light, searching for and finding every trace of himself hidden in the shape of the jaw, the set of the brow. "Who taught you that song?" "My mother," Wren said simply. "She sings it every night. She says it's a secret song, just for us." Before Kellen could say more, Ilara appeared in the doorway, pale and breathless, and understanding passed instantly between them. There was no more room for lies. "Wren," she said gently, "go back to bed. I'll be there in a moment." The boy, sensing the sudden seriousness in the air, obeyed without argument, casting one curious glance back before disappearing down the hall. Ilara stood frozen in the doorway, waiting for the anger she was certain would come, the fury of a man who had just learned he had a son hidden from him for 5 years. Instead, when Kellen finally spoke, his voice was rough with something closer to grief. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "I was afraid of what would happen to him if the wrong people knew. I was afraid he would be raised as a weapon instead of a child. I was afraid of losing him, the way I would have lost any say in his life the moment he was born within those walls. I would never have let anyone harm him." "I know that now," she whispered. "I didn't know it then. I only knew I was terrified, and running felt like the only way to protect him." Silence stretched between them, heavy with 3 lost years, unspoken fears, and the quiet ache of everything that might have been different. Kellen closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the weight of it all, the son he never knew he had, the years he could never get back. "I'm not asking your forgiveness tonight," Ilara said softly. "I only need you to understand why I did it." Kellen looked at her for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice had softened. "I understand fear better than you might think. I've spent years guarding against enemies who would use anyone close to me against me. I understand why you ran. That doesn't mean it didn't cost us both." Tears slipped down Ilara's cheeks, the exhaustion of years of hiding finally breaking through. "What happens now?" "Now," Kellen said quietly, "I would like the chance to know my son. Not to take him from you. Not to force either of you into a life you didn't choose. Just the chance to be his father, and perhaps, in time, to earn your trust again." It was not a demand. It was, astonishingly, a request, gentle and uncertain in a way she had never expected from him. Over the following weeks, Kellen stayed in Hollow Creek far longer than his wound required. He visited often, learning the small rhythms of Ren's world, patient in a way that surprised even himself. He asked before he acted. He listened more than he spoke. Slowly, carefully, trust began to rebuild itself between him and Ilara, not through grand gestures, but through small, steady moments of honesty. Ilara watched her son's face light up whenever Kellen arrived, watched the easy bond growing between them, and felt something long clenched inside her chest begin, finally, to loosen. One evening, as the sun set gently over Hollow Creek, the 3 of them walked together along the edge of the woods, Ren skipping ahead chasing fireflies, his laughter ringing bright through the quiet evening air. Kellen reached over and gently took Ilara's hand, not with demand, but with quiet hope. "Thank you," he said softly, "for keeping him safe, even when it meant keeping him from me." Ilara looked at him, at the boy running joyfully ahead of them, and felt, for the first time in 5 years, something that felt very much like peace. "Thank you," she said, "for understanding why I had to." Above them, the sky turned soft shades of gold and pink, and for the first time since she had fled into the night 3 years before, Ilara Voss allowed herself to believe that her son's secret name had not been a burden to hide, but a promise finally coming home.